Welcome to Old New Borrowed Blue, a show from the Blue Room about all our favourite things about Everton to make a nice change from the drudgery of the usual stuff going on around the club. I am made up this week to be joined by Dan Vane. Any regulars of Mailbag will know exactly who Dan is, but I'll let him introduce himself quickly.
I'm a part-time Santa Claus impersonator, full-time Uncle Albert lookalike, and I own a deli in Suffolk called Two Sevens Deli, where I sell a plethora of wonderful and delicious goods.
Which I can vouch for because I've seen it. Right, we'll kick off then, Dan. Cheers for that. So, before what I want to do now, before I sort of get into the Old New Borrowed Blue stuff, I just like to find out about people's first game or the first match that they remember. What was yours?
Well, my first game weirdly connects to my old player, because it was the first and only time I've ever seen that player play in the flesh. I became an Evertonian as my old player will, the backstory will become complete. But I didn't really, I played football and was aware of football, but had no line in the sand affiliation until I was about 8, when I watched the FA Cup final between Everton and Watford. And then I shocked my entire Spurs-obsessed football family by saying I wanted to be an Evertonian and wanted to support Everton. My first ever game that I can remember, and it was the first ever Everton game I went to. Happened to I lived all over the country as a kid because my dad is a civil engineer, so we moved wherever the work was. And during that 80s period where I became aware of Everton and became sort of aware of as much as you could in that age, there was no internet, there's no, you just read stuff in Shoot magazine, didn't you? And watched
Yeah,
Grandstand, you know what I mean? So actually watching football was really hard back then.
yeah.
Especially if you supported a team that were 400 miles away or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It was quite hard to watch, you know,
Well,
this
yeah.
team that I'd suddenly become fascinated with, that I'd seen win the FA Cup. To actually watch them was borderline impossible for me, living in, Monmouthshire and Wales and stuff like that. Although, as I say, I went to a school in the 80s in Wales, so it was a very football driven school, but mostly Reds, really,
Yeah.
and Man United fans and stuff. So my first game, my dad took me. He used to work away, but he came home and he took me to a League Cup game at Newport County. And it was Newport County Everton.
Yeah, another one.
And it would have been about, I had to look it up today. It was 10 days before my 10th birthday. And I don't remember the game at all. I don't remember anything really. I remember it being cold. And I remember being quite underwhelmed by the size of Newport County's ground because I'd been watching football on TV. I'd watched Everton in the FA Cup at Wembley and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I didn't realise at that age that smaller grounds existed. Do you know what I mean? And Everton won 5-1. I got to see the player that I'm going to pick for my old player play in the flesh for the one and only time. Paul Wilkinson scored a hat-trick, I think, in that game.
Underrated part of that squad, Paul Wilkinson.
So, yeah, and all I remember is it being cold and kind of damp and oppressive and loud. And it was the first time I'd really heard close quarters, full effing and jeffing. Real industrial South Wales language. I'd heard my dad swear at work. My mum and dad are very, very non-sweary people.
So nothing like your experience there then?
No, I'd never really experienced swearing at home. And I'd heard my dad say it at work on the site. I'd heard my dad say it on a building site. And then he'd realised I was there. You know what I mean? So this was like the first time I'd ever experienced large groups of very angry people swearing and, and all that. So it was quite an intense thing. But that was my first proper football match and first Everton game.
But I can't imagine many people's first Everton game was Newport County, but there we go. Um, right, let's get straight into it now then. So, who is your old player who you were alluding to just then?
It's Kevin Sheedy. Um, Without Kevin Sheedy, I'm not an Everton supporter.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Was he the player that you saw and were
he's the
like,
player. Yeah, I
you're
went as I
left-footed,
say,
aren't you?
I'm
You're
left-footed. Yeah,
left-footed as
so
well. There you
I
go.
went to school. I went to school in sort of Newport, and then we moved out to Chepstow in Monmouthshire. And my PE teacher was a blue, and he looked a bit like George Best. He had like long black hair and a black beard, kind of George Best slash Colombian drug lord. You know what I mean? Very attractive, swarthy man. And in a school full of Reds and United fans, as I say, I had no, I'm named after a Spurs player. My family are all Spurs season ticket holders, but I didn't really have a love or a affiliation at that point. And he turned around to me at one, it was the first time I'd ever tried to get in a team as well, because I've got this condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is quite nasty, and you bleed and you cut and you bruise and you dislocate very easily. And by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I'd had hundreds of stitches and broken bones. And my mum and dad mollycoddled me a bit. They didn't give me a bike, they wouldn't give me a bike and all this sort of stuff because I was terrified I was going to hurt myself, which I did.
Yeah.
I ended up breaking my elbow and getting 32 stitches coming off a BMX. But
Jeez.
So I was always too scared to try and be in a team, try and go to tryouts for football teams because I was worried about hurting myself. But I was quite good. I was half decent, nice left foot, scored lots of goals, goal hanger, penalty box goal hanger. Stand on the penalty spot, just lingering about. I took free kicks and penalties for the team I played for down there. And this PE teacher just said to me one day, "There's this bloke called Kevin Sheedy who plays for Everton, and you should try and watch him. You should, And,
yeah.
And as I say, back then it was borderline impossible to watch that. And unfortunately, in the FA Cup final, he didn't play, did he? He got injured and didn't play.
No, I think he played, didn't he? Kevin Richardson played on the wing instead.
But yeah, so he was it really for me. And then in later years, obviously with the advent of YouTube and stuff, and I could really watch him properly. And he's just he's the sort of footballer that doesn't exist anymore. And even if they do, they're becoming less and less. It's that wonderful, languid, mercurial.
I was going to say mercurial is the word, isn't it? It's
and those sort of footballers are becoming few and far between because of the sort of metric data dynamics of football. Players like that will be, you're seeing less and less of those Berber Toffee, Sheedy, languid sort of footballers. They don't run about enough.
Yeah, I mean? This is what I always think. It's like, so obviously we grew up in the 80s, and you look at footballers back then, and you look at the way everyone says you've got to track back as a forward and stuff like that now, and it's been like that for a few years. And then you think of players like Ian Rush. You wouldn't have Ian Rush tracking back, would you? You'd have him up there, and you'd have him in a toe-to-toe race with Kevin Ratcliffe. That's where you want your striker.
I think you had then. I think the ethos of a lot of teams, especially that Everton team, you had players that did the work for those players. You had players that put that a bit like what Deschamps became,
for France.
In the pomp of Zidane, in the era of Zidane, my favourite footballer of all time, Deschamps made his life easy by getting it for him and giving it to him.
Yeah.
And he was like, you just stand there, right, and think about your next cigarette. I'll go and get the ball. I'll do all the dirty stuff. I'll go and get the ball for you and I'll give it to you. And every time I get it, I'll give it to you. And it's like the Chicago Bulls with Jordan thing. It's like, give it to Michael, and that Everton team had Peter Reid and, and players like that would run around, get the ball and give it to, Graham Sharp. Graham Sharp wasn't, carrying, he wasn't going to win any pressures and, ball retention, ball recovery stats or anything like that. He just stood there just stood there lingering about, abusing Bruce Grobbelaar until the ball was launched into where he needed to be. He wasn't, and I think Sheedy was the epitome of that sort of player that just was so. Everything looked so easy. That left foot was an absolute cliche as you like, but it was a wand. It was an absolute wand, and I just over the years, as I got more obsessed with Everton, and as my affiliation became an obsession, watching YouTube videos of Kevin Sheedy just became a sort of weekly occurrence. It would just be like trying to find more footage. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because he's just my hero, absolute hero.
He also he's got a big part in my very early Everton memories. So I kind of remember the FA Cup final, but I think was more concerned about my dad getting lost in London to really be able to enjoy the match so much. You have these irrational fears when you're a kid, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
The first game was the first game of the 84-85 season. We got beat 4-1 by Spurs. Don't remember much about that, thankfully. But the first game I really, really remember was we beat Man United 5-0 in October of that season. And Kevin Sheedy scored a header, very unusual for him, but then went off with a head injury. So he planted this header against United, got clattered, went down. I was my 8-year-old brain was blown to bits. The fact that a player could go off, have some stitches, put a bandage on, and come back on the pitch. And I wrote about it. You had it, like when you were in primary school and you had like your news book, and you'd write what happened the weekend. I've got pictures in my news book of Kevin Sheedy with blood coming out of his head and this game and Everton winning 5-0. And I think at that point, it was probably the best day of my life. It was unbelievable. But he was like a massive part of that game. Probably not for the reason you'd think, because you would think it would be like, a lovely free kick or a long range shot or he's whipped across in. It was for this, this sort of basically battle and performance he kind of put in because he played on with a head injury. Might not happen anymore. He might not be able to do that now. But he was some player. There's obviously the stuff about the 2 free kicks in one game.
Yeah, I mean that's
the bicycle kick against City.
That 2 free kick thing for me became. I think that I had memories of him as a child, but it wasn't until I was a teenager, and even in my late teens when I remember seeing that for the first time properly, on a video somewhere on YouTube or whatever, and that cemented it for me.
Yeah,
that was like I knew I liked this guy, and I knew I knew there was a connection. I knew there was a reason why I liked this player, and then I saw that, and it rubber stamped it for me. It was just like, yeah, that's rock and roll football. That's what it's meant to be. It's for me, football is entertainment, and football is, it's the struggle against, it's the struggle of good versus evil. It's theatre. You know what I mean? It can be the greatest theatre on earth. It can be the most dramatic, wonderful, heartbreaking, pathos-ridden 90 minutes of your life. And when you've got someone like that can do things like that and then sign off with the old like this, it's just perfection. It's just perfection.
Yeah, I mean, you can't underestimate how difficult that is because basically, I don't think I've ever seen another player do that.
No,
or I don't even think another player would have maybe the ability, but not the plums to do that. To just plant it in one corner, retake it, or just plant it in the other corner. Just like that. This time, then. It's unbelievable. And probably, I don't know, I think because of the time it was. If this was in the mid-90s in the Premier League, Sky Sports era, you would have seen that a million times on the telly. It'd be talked about in all these talking heads programs. But because the 80s was a bit of a dead period for football in terms of its popularity because of the hooliganism problem, and it was very much a sort of male-dominated arena. The football ground. I was lucky that my dad took me when he did. I say my dad was only 23 when he started taking me, and I was 8, so I was really lucky to get to see. But yeah, it was so good to see players like that. Just want to pick up on another thing with Kevin Sheedy as well. Wasn't scared of a brawl because he had a brawl with Mark Keown and a Chinese in one of the famous team sessions. That Martin Keown apparently is a very hard fella.
I know a girl who kicked him in the nuts.
Go on, might as well tell that story.
I went out with a girl She was a ballet dancer. And she was approached by Mr. Keown one evening at some thing. And the things that she said, he said, I won't repeat. But she kicked him in the plums, to get him to sod off, basically.
Yeah, deserved it. Even if he hadn't said anything, he would have deserved it. Yeah, Kevin Sheedy is a great choice for an old player. Not one we've had yet, but we've not had many 80s kids on. So
well, you haven't had many people as old as me on. That's why, Les.
Same, that's it, isn't it? None from our era on just yet. Right, we'll move on to a new player then. So who is your favourite current Everton player?
This I found really hard.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it?
Because I don't really like most of them. I think it would be, we've had Branthwaite get picked, and that's an obvious one. Because I think of all the squad, he's the one that he could play for Real Madrid now. He could play for Liverpool now. He could play for Arsenal now. He could play for Man City right now. He is that. He is, and it's going to be bloody heartbreaking when he goes and wins stuff with someone else. And I hope it is Madrid. I hope Carlo does nab him, because I don't want it to be City.
I don't want anyone over here. No,
I don't want him to be John Stones' natural, because I think he's calmer than John Stones on the ball. I think he's a better defender, actually. And
he's less prone to fanny about with it as well.
Yeah, I think he's a lot calmer. He's a lot steadier. So I think that would be easy, because he is very likeable. He's done his bit. He's done his loan. It worked. One of the few times in Everton history we've ever sent anyone on loan and it's worked. But the rest of them I can kind of take or leave. Pickford is great and everything, but for me, the player that represents for me that underdog story, that kind of trial and adversity thing, and I've always liked him, and I've really hated it when he was getting pelters, I just love Mykolenko. I think it's a poison chalice, that position, and has been for a decade.
Yeah,
it's a horrible thing to have to do, because everybody will always compare you, and he's never going to be a rambunctious, swashbuckling left back. It's never going to happen, because that's not who he is. And I think, unfortunately for him, because of what went before him, his early part of his career at Everton, people were incredibly underwhelmed because he wasn't whipping crosses in and doing wonderful things. But I think over time, and his backstory is as well known as anything. And the sheer traumatic nature of his start as an Everton player is well written. But I think for him to persevere when he could have been quite easily dropped for anyone, he could have been dropped for Ashley Young, Ben Godfrey, anyone, a better athlete, a more positionally wise, older head. But he's hung in there, and he's just a really good left back. He's not a brilliant attacking wing back. He's not a modern left back. He's not going to get you 5 assists and a couple of free kicks every year. He's never going to be the player being linked with anybody, right? But I just love the fact that he just does his job. He's unglamorous. He's unfussy. He's still a kid. He looks like he's 10, and you can rely on him. And we have a squad full of players who are 50% reliable at the best of times, and a lot of the times they've let us down. And in a squad that is full of players I couldn't care less about, he's the one I really think, good on you.
Yeah. No.
I like it when he has a good game. I like it when he gets a little bit of praise off of people that are normally, talking about a conversation that happened on a train a year or two ago when someone said he was shit. And
I forgot about that.
And I just like the fact that the performances he puts in are unspectacular yet functional.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a way that is Dyche. That is what we are. We are currently a team that is unspectacular and functional. And as much as I hate it, and I really do, I find I find the team we are right now is heartbreaking to me. I can't bear a football team that's sole tactic is to stop the other team playing. That does my nut in. Football isn't about sort of repression; it's about expression. I sound like Dyche now, don't I? You know what I mean? It's not about expression; it's about repression.
That was more Dan Perry, I think.
That's more him. But so it does my head in that we are that team, that we're in full on survival mode. That wrecks me completely. But I think weirdly that non-risk, that risk averse element is actually his benefit, because he's not expected to race down the outside, because we don't overlap. We don't do that. It's not how we play. It's not Peenham, but it's not Bainar. You know what I mean? It's not Luca Dean overlapping Richarlison. It's not. We don't do that. We're not dynamic enough.
Yeah.
And actually being completely and utterly undynamic as a football team has benefited him just become solid and dependable. And he's as sweet as you like. You could just give him a massive cuddle, couldn't you?
Oh,
you just want to squeeze his cheeks and take him to a wimpy.
I was one of those who didn't think he was very good, I'll admit. When we signed him in probably the first season, I would imagine. I thought his performances were very hit and miss, to the point where he cut inside that much. I wasn't even convinced he was left-footed. I just couldn't get my head around him at all. But he scored that goal at Leicester.
Yeah.
Which I still can't get my head around how he hit that volley the way he did. But it was absolute. I was there at the time as well. I was actually at that game, and it was just unbelievable. When you saw it go in, and then you realise it was Mykolenko that hit it. But then I think this season, as you say, he's not expected to do anything other than be a good defender. And to be honest, that's what I want from a fullback. I would sooner have a fullback who's really good at defending than one that's really good at attacking. So you probably look at the difference between, you'd say, him and maybe Luca Dean. Luca Dean, very, very good going forward. He was all right defending, but not great. Mykolenko, probably the reverse, but I would sooner have that, because I think it's ultimately up to your forward players to make things happen. You shouldn't rely on your fullbacks to make things happen, really. I know it's a thing of the modern game, and it's kind of been that way probably since Baines and Coleman, if not before, where your fullbacks are an attacking threat. But I don't think you don't need to be.
You had the classic sort of Marcelo, didn't you, at Real Madrid, and Alves and Roberto Carlos and players like that were very much, because of their nature as Brazilian football, they couldn't, even though they were being told you're a left back, they were like, no, mate, I'm getting, I've got a wizard of a left foot on me, mate. I'm going that way, So, but even then you had those players, didn't you, that were sort of rampaging sort of players that like to get forward, like to lash a ball. But I just love the fact that he's just become a 7 out of 10. Yeah.
You also had Les Roberts in the Birkenhead Sunday League. There's that
obviously,
Division 2, ripped it up there. No, but he has become just a 7 out of 10, hasn't he? He's just a very solid. And I think everything about his game was epitomised in that one moment against Aston Villa, where he slid in and stopped a certain goal. And that's what you want. If we've got a whole backline of players like that, which we kind of have now, it's like, it's no surprise that we've kept Kevin 7 clean sheets, not Kevin clean sheets, 7 clean sheets, which is the most in the league. And it's because of players like that, isn't it, as well? As much as it is Pickford, it's about the players in front of him. And when you've got 3 of the 4 as Mykolenko, Tarkowski, and Branthwaite, it's all good, and he's pivotal in that. So that's a really good choice. And again, not one we've had before, but I am fully on board the Mykolenko train now, completely. I've done a 180, and I love the lad. Interesting choice for your borrowed, and again, one I can fully see why you've picked him, and I can fully get behind, and I just wish it had worked out better for him. So your favourite borrowed is
Manuel Fernandes.
What a player!
Anybody that knows what I like about football will understand why I picked Manuel Fernandes. And we touched on it earlier. You know, you can, and I don't care if I sound like an old fart. I am one.
So, we've got to go.
I am one, right? I am one. And I do bemoan on a regular basis the lack of flair in football these days. The lack of flair, not flair for flair's sake, but players with bravery, players with that little bit of something extra that makes them think, I'll just go, I'll just drift and then I'll do that and then I'll spin inside and then I'll do this. And then the kind of footballers that, and it's the cliche, and I don't care if I end up sounding like Jimmy Hill by the end of this, but players that paint pictures, players that see things before everybody else and do things that surprise and confound and cause hairs on your arms to stand up. Players that thrill and frustrate. And we are losing those players with every season that passes, with every pressing stat, with every running stat, with every heat map, with every single moment where athletes are being chosen over footballers. We are losing those footballers. Those, and the only time that you see them, the only time you see footballers like that these days is in world-class teams that have players around them to protect them and allow them to do their beautiful stuff. Yeah. Like at City. City, people always argue with me on Twitter about it. And they say, well, look, you got De Bruyne, you got blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but that's in the elite team in the world where he has Rodri to protect him, to do to allow him to make his mistakes and paint his pictures. But there used to be a time when nearly every club in the land had that player, whether it was Georgie Kinkladze or Matthew Le Tissier. I mean, I know he's a crackpot, but he was
a cracking player, though.
What a player. Yeah. Chris Waddle, Glenn Hoddle, Gianfranco Zola. Every team had this player that would pick the ball up and do something that would get you like that make you go. And it didn't matter whether you were a neutral or a fan of that club, you loved watching them play. And Manny Fernandes, when he came to Everton, was all of that with bells on. He was frustrating and wonderful and dynamic and strong and weak at the same time, and could drift past people, could drift in and out of games, could look like he wasn't even there, but then could just pick the ball up and do stuff. And I wanted it so badly to happen. I was desperate, because he was the sort of player that you just thought, well, that if we get him in, that's another creative body. That's another art. It's another tool in the armory of a player that can unlock something and do something. Yeah. And he shone brightly and then buggered off and just sort of sat in the stands, and it was going to happen, wasn't it? It was all done. Deal was done. He was in the stands. He was signing autographs.
Yeah. And then next thing was at Valencia.
I mean, literally,
you kind of understand why to a degree.
Almost a metaphor for what it's like to be an Everton fan, really.
Yeah. I think,
just so close. I mean, we talked about it before with, it could be a complete and utter 15-parter podcast, but the sliding doors thing, there are so many. There are so many. And I absolutely adored him as a footballer. And I wanted it so badly to happen, because I just love watching footballers like that. Those sort of, and again, that sort of player, that 10 or whatever you want to call them, doesn't really exist in modern football anymore. People wear the 10, but they're not 10s anymore, really, are they? No. And, when I was thinking about my old player today, I thought about Gary Speed for a brief minute, because I always think about Gary Speed all the time. He's one of the few Everton players that affected me greatly. I was 20 when he scored that hat-trick against Southampton.
Oh, yeah.
And that incredible season, scored in the derby, winner at Chelsea, I think.
Yeah.
I think he finished top goal scorer with Dunk, I think, that season. I think 11 goals. And he wore the 10. And he was that, wasn't he? dynamic, and he could score goals, and he could head the ball, and he could crack one from 25 yards, and he
He could
had
track
pace,
back and tackle as well.
he had pace, he had power, he had a bit of grit. He was just, and they don't really, we don't play with a 10 anymore, do we? Really, we play with a sort of split striker thingy, whatever, But that creative playmaker, and he was that, and his career just drifted, didn't it? After that,
I'm just looking at his stats here.
He went to Valencia. I think he went to Russia, didn't he? Did he go to Russia?
He only played 56 games in 4 years at Valencia.
Whoa.
He did. So he came back to Everton twice during that time. I thought we'd only had him on loan twice, but 3 times. 2007 when he played 9, scored 2, and that's the standout thing for me was that goal against United.
Yeah.
Where he absolutely bladdered it into the top corner, and we used to sit over the other side of the park and then right by the away fans. And I've never seen a United crowd silenced so much.
Yeah.
Obviously, he went on to score 4 in the last half hour of that game. But for that moment, he and Turner dropped it in the box, I think it was, wasn't it? And
it was,
and we fell apart. But for that moment on 60 minutes or whenever it was, to be stood there and seeing United fans gone completely silent was just wonderful. It was, you don't get that very often. It was magic. And then there's also obviously the one where the clip where he takes the piss out of the entire Arsenal midfield.
That's it,
But so he came back to us twice. He came back in 2011 as well. Before signing full time for Besiktas, then Lokomotiv Moscow, then Krasnodar, then Apollon Simiris. I'm guessing they're from Greece. Or
Cyprus.
Got to be somewhere like that, isn't it? And then 2022-23, he's currently at let me see, Sepahan, Iranian team. So
how old is he? Was he 38?
He's been about. He is. Where are we? 37.
See, he can still do a job. Bring him back.
He's younger than Ashley Young. But
bring him home.
In that time, the most prolific he's had is the 5 years at Lokomotiv Moscow, where he played 103 games. Everything else has been like double digits. It could be one of them. A bit of a sliding doors, but had he signed for us, would he have, played prolifically? I don't know.
Yeah.
Would have been nice to know, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because as you say, for that first loan period, although it was only 9 games, he had a big impact on us. He had a really big impact on that team.
Oh, I loved him.
So, a good choice. And again, one of those I don't think many people will pick. But he is your sort of mercurial player, isn't he? He was
I'm an absolute sucker for that kind of shit. I really am. I can't help myself.
Nothing wrong with it. It's a romantic way to look at it. I like it. Right, we'll move on to blue then. So this is your favourite Evertonian or your favourite thing about Everton. Who have you gone for this?
I found this quite hard because, who'd you go for, Les? Mary Berry? You know what I mean? Well known for a stint at the Park End.
I can't help thinking about Mary Berry now without thinking of the Idols record that keeps repeating her name. That's all I think of.
So, and I thought about, and there's been a bit of this on Twitter recently, and as someone with an accent like mine who's lived all over the country and never really had a kind of direct link to Liverpool, you question your blue credentials quite a lot.
I'd probably just question my sanity, to be fair. But
and I mean, a lot of it is down to that. A lot of it is, why have I done this to myself? I actually had a choice. I didn't have a dad or a mum or whatever pushing me down the Goodison Road. I had a choice. Like,
I mean, to be honest, if it was Spurs or Everton, you were fucked either way, really.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So,
it's like people that shave their head and they're not going bald. It's like, what is wrong with you people? And I feel that a lot of the time, especially over the last few years, Everton Twitter has become a pretty hateful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But in the early days of Everton Twitter, when it became a bit like beer Twitter, when I used to be a brewer, it was a wonderful tool for connecting people and just talking and venting, and not in a spiteful, malicious ITK way, in a, oh, what did you think about that? And and well, the new kit comes out next week, and just stuff.
Yeah.
And over that period, you meet people, don't you, on social circles, and some are passing acquaintances, some you meet up in real life, some you bump into at Loftus Road or whatever for another cup defeat, and over that period, I think for me, this person in particular has given me a sense of not feeling so disassociated from Everton as a thing, and has made me feel like I am a sort of Evertonian, I guess. And this person has involved me in shows like this, because my favourite blue is you.
You can't say that.
And without you inviting me on this show and this platform, I wouldn't have met a lot of people in the blue room and stuff like that. And as a community, I found it really supportive. It's funny. It's desperate.
It's desperate.
It's, it can be cathartic. It can be whatever. But I've always said to you that my involvement in this operation has always felt like a massive honour, and it really does.
No, with it, yeah, you caught me unawares with that there. I don't really know what to say. No, but I think what you're saying about like the community we've got and the people who contribute to this, I have genuinely, like yourself, met some of what will probably be my best mates for life now, because of Twitter and because of Everton and because of the Blue Room, ultimately. And it's a really odd thing to say that. Like, we'll be mates for life now. We first met. This sounds romantic, doesn't it? We first met in that pub. What pub was it?
The Cross Keys in Covent Garden.
Yeah, by Holborn Station. That one, yeah. And we've, as you say, we've met a few times since. And yeah, it's one of those where you think, like, you say to people, "Oh, I know all these people off Twitter, met them in real life, brilliant," and it sounds a bit weird, but I'd say probably most of my friendship group now, and the people I talk to most, that's how I've met them. It's through this and Twitter, and it's nice, isn't it? It is nice.
I did the one thing that, as I say, I love getting those little text messages saying, well, will you do this? Will you come on here and stuff? And a lot of the time, I feel a bit underqualified, because, I don't go to the game, and I don't, I go to as much as I can, but, I've got a family and I live a long way away, and I've now just opened a shop. So, I find it hard to engage with football in general most of the time, because I've just got so much to do. But, which is probably why I get asked on mailbag, because it doesn't involve football. It just involves complete and utter nonsense.
Why do you think I do it?
Of which I'm absolutely world class at. But no, and I think the one thing I truly regret about sort of anything, if I do, is the fact that I've made all these new friends who I'm absolutely desperate to go to Goodison Park with. And I'm desperate to go to the Denby Castle. And I'm desperate to end up partially naked on the oblong, surrounded by Underberg bottles. And
so yeah, Bolloco.
and it's something that unfortunately, with every season that passes and every season we get closer to leaving,
yeah,
I find it harder and harder, because of my life and the things I've got in my life, to get up there and to do these things that I really want to do. And I said to my wife the other day, my wife goes to New Zealand for 3 weeks back home. She's going back home for the first time in 6 years in March. And she's going, so I'm going to be on my own with the kid and the dog in the shop for 3 weeks. So I've already threatened I might start smoking again, but or chewing tobacco. But
that's the one.
But I've already agreed with my wife, because I'm going to do this 3-week stint of basically high-end crowd control and business management, that I'm going to be owed a weekend. and that I'm going to be owed a weekend where I can get on the train on a Friday afternoon and go and see the football. And I'm going to make it will be next season now. You know what I mean? It will be next season, or whatever. But there will be an absolute time when I managed to get on a train finally, come up to Goodison Park again, and get my Denby disco on. You know what I mean?
Give us a shout when you get that pass.
It's been far too long. It's been far too long.
Yeah, just on the business thing as well. It's quite easy to underestimate how hard it is to run a business. So when me and my dad ran the tea shop, we gave up our season tickets then. We had season tickets in the park end for about 10 years. When we started running that, we gave up because you really don't have time to do anything else. Especially if you've got, kids at home and stuff as well. It's like your entire time taken up with that.
Officially, the shop doesn't open Sunday or Monday. But it doesn't mean, I was there all day today.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was in the shop all day today doing stuff, painting, making stuff happen. I had parcels, I had deliveries arriving, I had stuff arriving today. So I was in the shop all day, then I go and do the school run, then I come home, then I walk the dog, then I do this and all this. So my Sundays are this little box that I don't do anything work-related in, and we try and do something as a family. But we've only been open 6 weeks. The chances of me getting a break of any length are, and that's fine. And, I chose to do this and I am genuinely loving it. So if I end up being there once we start selling alcohol and we start selling cheese boards and charcuterie and wine in the shop, there are days where I'm going to be there 16 hours a day.
Nice. Yeah.
But that's the way it is. And that's the way you've got to just see it, haven't you? You just got to see, well, I've made this decision. The only way this works is if I do this. And the payoff, hopefully, is when I turn around to someone, employ someone on a Saturday, and I can go back to watching the football again and hanging out with my mates and stuff like that. But as I say, I find my inclusion in the Blue Room an absolute. I've always seen it as a bit of a surprise. And I listened to Adams last week, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I just sort of thought, how do you sort of, when you don't go to the game and you don't have a dad or a parent or whatever that introduced you to this club, how do you sort of quantify your connection? And I think I now quantify my connection with this football club more about the people I know who love this football club.
Yeah.
So it's more about, I don't quantify it about the team on the pitch that much anymore, or the shambles that run it. I quantify my connection with Everton with people like yourself, and that's how I quantify it now.
I think that's what it's like for most of us as well. We often say it's sort of the match, the match bit it's a tiny part of your overall sort of experience, even on the one day. But like for me, it's about going with my dad and the kids, having that time with them there. Even if it's just a couple of hours a week, to have that time together is really good. Or on some occasions, going to the pub and seeing everyone, having that time there. The match is like I mean, I know we love Everton, and it's like, I know we say we hate them, but we love them really. We couldn't do without them, even though we think we could. But it is a bit of a context for like seeing people that you wouldn't normally see otherwise. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to bring out with this show, to be honest, is those personal memories and why do you like Everton? What do you like about Everton? What are the things that sort of drew you to the club and have kept you there? So that was perfect. To hear you say, you've got a totally different perspective from anyone who's been on it so far. Because as you say, you're from London, you're from a Spurs family. But your story about how you got to Everton, it's as valid as anyone's. You don't have to validate your support for the club. And it's so nice to hear stuff like that, to hear how people got to the same thing as we did. So I appreciate you coming on, Dan. That was brilliant. Really, really enjoyed it. Good to hear your choices. A little bit humbled by your final number. I really appreciate that. If anyone else wants to get involved, as I say, just slide into our DMs at the Blue Room EFC on Twitter. Thanks to Dan. We will be back with another guest next week. Up the Toffees.